Are you thinking about running your first marathon? If so, congratulations. This is a big step. Running a marathon is not easy, but at the same time, it's incredibly rewarding. And it's something that most runners will never do. It's a very difficult thing to run 26.2 miles. And as soon as you start thinking about, wow, am I ready to do this? I'm going to run 26.2 miles. Can I do this? There comes a lot of information that you can be totally overwhelmed by. So what I want to do in this video is cut through some of that noise and really focus on 3 big mistakes that if you avoid and if you can steer clear of these marathon hurdles, you have a much higher chance of running a good marathon, running a successful marathon, and running a marathon that you can be proud of, one that you have fun doing. Because the last thing that you want is to get out there, run your first marathon, and it turns into this miserable sufferfest. So let's avoid these 3 mistakes, and your first marathon will be your first successful marathon. Now, the first thing is to make sure that you are even ready to start training. Now, you've probably noticed that there is no couch to marathon program because you can't really go from being a sedentary non-runner to someone who's ready to run 26 miles in 16 or 20 weeks. The body needs more time to get fit, to adapt, and to do so in a slower time frame so that you don't risk an injury. Now, there's a couple ways that you can know if you're ready to even begin the training. The first is using the long run test. Most of you are probably running a long run, if not every week, then most weeks. If you're not, now's a good time to start. But the long run is really the most specific type of workout that you can do for the marathon itself. So if you're 16 or 20 weeks out from a marathon that you're looking at, we need to make sure that your long run is at least already at 10 miles. If you are running comfortably a double-digit long run, then you are ready to start the training process for a marathon. Because if your long run is less than 10 miles, you are going to have to increase it too rapidly before the marathon. And that really does pose a huge injury risk. So let's avoid the rapid progression in distance of your long run by starting your training cycle with a long run of at least 10 or 11 miles. And that will ensure that you have a safe, gradual long run progression that gets you into better shape with less injury risk. So if you're ready to start training, speaking of the long run, let's really focus on the long run. The long run is your best friend. It is the most specific workout that you can do for the marathon itself, and it really does prepare you much more thoroughly for exactly what you are going to experience on race day. Now, a lot of training plans that you can find online or download for free have long run cutback weeks every other week or every 3 weeks. Now, if you're training for a marathon, this does not serve your best interests. A long run is not only the most beneficial workout for the marathon, but it's something that we must do regularly and consistently to build all those fitness gains that we're looking for to have a successful shot at 26.2 miles. So instead of taking a cutback week every other week or every 3 weeks, let's only do that every 4 to 6 weeks. Because we need to very gradually and progressively build the distance of that long run. Because when we realize that the long run is the most important run that marathoners do every week, we won't be cutting it every other week. Finally, in our quest to make your first marathon a successful marathon, let's talk about the race itself. One of the biggest mistakes that runners make is not respecting the distance of the marathon. Now, if it's your first race, you don't know what to expect. And that's completely understandable. You've never run this distance before, and you've never run it in a race environment. You know, there's one thing running 20 miles by yourself or with a running friend, but it's very different to race 26.2 miles. And so the final mistake that we want to avoid is pacing yourself too aggressively at the beginning of the marathon. Now, a lot of coaches or authors, other figureheads in the running community will tell you not to set a time goal for your first marathon. I disagree. I think any runner, even if it's your first marathon, can set a time goal as long as it's realistic, as long as it is within the realm of possibility and you execute that pacing goal appropriately. So let's say, for example, that you're running your first marathon and you don't want to run just to finish the race. In other words, you don't want to run the marathon at your easy pace. You want to try to see what you can do. The best way to determine what your goal marathon time can be is to use a half marathon race time. A half marathon race is likely the longest race that you're going to do that's shorter than the marathon, and it gives you a much better predictor of what you can do in a marathon race compared with, say, a 5K. So let's say that you want to run a sub 4-hour marathon, but you've never run a marathon before. How do you know if this is even a realistic goal? The first thing to do is look at your last half marathon time. Was it under 2 hours? Obviously it has to be. If you're going to run a sub 2-hour marathon, that does mean you have to run 2 half marathons back to back at a sub 2-hour pace. And the best way to do this is to look at an equivalent performance. So a sub 4 marathon is worth about a 152 or 153 half marathon. If you can run half marathons in the low 150s, somewhere around that time, then you're ready to go after that sub 4-hour marathon time. And this is the true no matter what time you're targeting. There are always equivalent performances for whatever race goal that you have. So no matter what your time goal is, make sure it is appropriate for you and for your fitness level. And when in doubt, err on the conservative side. I would much rather you run 2 or 3 minutes slower than you might be able to in a marathon, but you finish the race healthy, you finish the race happy, and your motivation is still high. You didn't have to struggle through the last 5 miles with a sore knee and take a lot of walk breaks. That really hurts your motivation long term. We want to avoid that. So if we can run a more conservative race, but still have a time goal, and then execute a sound pacing strategy through the race, you are going to have a much better marathon, and maybe more importantly, you're going to set your future self up for even more successful marathons.